JD Vance quite nearly pulled off a magic trick last night as he effectively sane-washed MAGA through moderate rhetoric, but Tim Walz did poke a major hole in that performance by asking a simple question. We'll talk about who won the VP debate, whether you can win a VP debate, and how much it matters to win a VP debate if you did win a VP debate. The politicization of a natural disaster isn't surprising, but it is especially disgusting this time around. We'll break down what's true and what's not about Helene. Trump doesn't want to pay your overtime, and he's back to just saying random mean stuff about Kamala Harris. Also, is Ted Cruz going to be relieved of his Senate duties and finally get the chance to podcast full-time? Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
All right. Well, I can give some global thoughts, Jason, and I was texting you about this last night as we were watching the VP debate, but I think the most important thing to do is zero in on the moment that I think is going to have the most lasting impact of this debate. And it was an exchange that happened in the waning hours of the debate. We're going to take it in three parts. Let's start with this clip.
And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
Ravi, can I just say I'm focused on the future. Here's a question about the past.
Right. And I think he used this line multiple times. He was also asked whether he would, whether he would certify this election. Let's go to the clip.
Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future.
Yeah, so he's asked about the future, but he won't answer because he's focused on the future. Now, here was what Walz had to say about all of this.
Does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah, well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this, I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, that's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, you're...
And so the Harris campaign tweeted that this was the largest gap they saw in focus groups and that they were already cutting that moment for an ad, which is not surprising. CNN actually had their own focus group going on right now, and not a lot of movement permanently where people said, okay, I've made up my mind. But there was one person who did based on this exchange. Let's go to this video.
Maybe.
Or maybe not.
Oh, okay. We're not going to that one. You can describe it.
Yeah, so it was, basically it was like, hey, this is, disqualifying for me. So yeah, and Axe tweeted, Vance was doing well tonight. And then Walz asked a direct question about the 2020 election and Vance ran from it like a bat out of hell. So I think this exchange, I have like less fun takeaways from the entirety of the debate, but I think this exchange could have some staying power.
Yeah, because typically in a debate like this, you say it's the stuff that happens in the first 30 minutes that matters. That's when people make up their mind about that kind of thing. And then the other piece of this is it's the VP debate, right? So it's like, if it's happening in the VP debate, you wonder whether it's going to make a difference anyway, because most people are not paying any attention to it. I think to the extent people paid attention to this VP debate, it was to learn more about these two people. So then if you have a moment that you can clip out, I think that's really what you're looking for in a debate like this. You figure people aren't going to see it. So if you have a moment you can clip out and then use that as the way to introduce two things. One, JD Vance, and two, what happened in the VP debate, because most people aren't going to see it. You can make it where a thing that happens in the waning moments of the debate ends up being the only thing people know about the debate. And
Right.
it kind of sounds like that's where we're headed. And, you know, Axe is right. It sounds like JD Vance was having a pretty good night. Although I had seen where some people pointed out, and I think it's a good point, that JD Vance was having a good night for JD Vance, but it wasn't necessarily going to do much for Donald Trump. But now it looks like it's bringing back the thing that was, other than Dobbs, probably the biggest deciding factor in the 2022 election, Ravi, is people feeling like they can't vote for someone who can't admit that they lost an election because it strains the limits of credibility. And this puts it right back at the center of the conversation.
Yeah, and it looks like we now have that clip of that undecided voter. So let's hear from them.
Well, I'm going to be voting for Kamala Harris. You know, one of the stark sort of aspects of that debate that really stuck with me was when they were talking about January 6th and how Mike Pence certified the election, and they were wondering if JD Vance would certify the election should Trump lose. And, you know, JD Vance didn't really give us a definitive answer, and I'm disappointed in that fact. And I don't think that I can trust someone, you know, with my vote if they're not going to respect it.
Now, this is the clip that Democrats, you know, want as many voters as possible to see. Strangely, there was a moment in this debate that I think both Democrats and Republicans were outraged by. And it was this exchange over migrants. Hopefully we have this clip here because it got really awkward with the moderators. And I think we're loading that now. But what was crazy was, you know, Vance was fact checked, kind of like Trump was, where he was saying, you know, these are illegal immigrants. The moderator was like, these are actually, so a lot of them are legal. Vance demanded time to clarify it. And from what I could tell, he was, you know, side note is he was talking at like Ben Shapiro speed levels in this debate. So it was really hard to really figure out what was going on. But he was, his explanation to me was basically like, I don't like the law, therefore I'm going to call them illegals. Walz then tried to jump in and was like, hey, I should be able to, like, if he's going to demand time, I want time. They cut off Walz's mic and Vance's mic. Now, the right was, you know, they were up in arms. We're getting fact checked. His mic's getting cut off. I tweeted immediately being like, this is like, they're cutting off Walz. They're not cutting off Vance. Vance demanded time. And then Walz's mic was cut off. I think by and large, this is a very poorly moderated debate. But yeah, let's actually go to this clip of this moment.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
Thank you.
Senator, we have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important
We're
because
going to turn now to the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check.
That line, by the way, everybody's trying to get that all over the place.
Yeah. I was not aware that you would be telling people when I lie. You know, I was told I would be allowed to lie in this debate without anybody telling on me. It's just not a good look. And the conniption fit that right-wing politicians go into on social media every time we have one of these debates about fact-checking is becoming a pattern to the point where, Ravi, it's starting to feel like it's okay to lie is like a Republican politician sort of philosophical mainstay at this point. It's like a bedrock belief is that lying in a political debate is okay and no one should stop you from doing it, right? I mean, it's an interesting position.
Well, I mean, the narrative on the right is that first of all, they believe that what Vance is saying is true, and it's a really hard thing to argue. And they believe the same thing about Trump. They also think that they point to things that Harris said in the last debate. And off the top of my head, I can't even remember what they were saying, but they'll point to some moments where Harris said certain things. Like I think that there was an American combat service member killed or something during whatever period of time they were talking about in the last debate. And let's say for the sake of argument that Harris in the entirety of the last debate said a few things that were not true, right? Let's just say that. Is there any doubt that it's 100-1 Trump to Harris? So what they want is equal amounts of fact checking, no matter how many lies either side tells. That's essentially what they're arguing for.
Well, also, they're saying, no, we believe they are illegal immigrants. And it's like, okay, you have this twisted way of getting there where you say they shouldn't have been given legal status, so I'm going to call them illegal immigrants. What the moderator said was they have legal status. That's correct. I mean, you're free to come back, JD Vance, with they've been given legal status, but I don't think it was wrong, which I think he did. So, or I don't think it was right. So therefore I called. That's fine. You don't get to say what you fact checked me with was untrue. That was the truth. What you said was not the truth. They are confusing true with the old Stephen Colbert report truthiness. Right. They're confusing it with it feels true and therefore it is true. Well, that doesn't make it true.
Right. And I think there was one moment that had me jumping out of my seat in particular, and I know for a lot of Obama veterans and Democrats generally, Vance claimed at one point that Trump tried to save the ACA. Right. And this was a typical move by Vance during this debate where he was fast talking. He was making all kinds of claims, and every answer he gave, you would have gotten the impression that he takes climate change seriously. He's a nuanced guy on abortion. They're trying to save the ACA. And I thought, Walz gave a pretty good response on this one. It's fine. We don't need to go back and forth on that. Axe later on CNN, I thought, gave a pretty thorough overview of why this is BS, in case anybody was wondering.
The Affordable Care Act has meant so much to so many people. Donald Trump tried 60 times to kill it. Only John McCain saved it. When he couldn't kill it, he cut the budget for marketing of the ACA. He cut subsidies for the ACA. There were many ways in which he tried to strangle the ACA because he couldn't outright kill it. And he said in this campaign that he wanted to eliminate it still. So to hold him up as a champion, the guy who saved the Affordable Care Act, was perhaps the most disingenuous thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just, I don't think it's that helpful to go through and fact check everything. I think what we can keep an eye on is what's ricocheting through the internet over the course of the next few days and doubling down on those. There's a lot of people on Twitter are fact checking all kinds of claims. Like there was a big exchange over whether immigrants increase the cost of housing or not. And Vance promised some kind of study that was going to show that that was true. He wound up tweeting out some kind of speech that one of the members of the Federal Reserve gave, but selectively only taking the one part of the speech that suggested that perhaps immigration could drive up housing, but neglected to share another paragraph where they say the exact opposite. And then people were sharing studies, plenty of studies that say the opposite. And for people who, I'm not sure this is an issue people are voting on, but the reason why immigration actually decreased the cost of housing is because you need people to build houses, and those often are immigrants. The other question I would ask somebody is, when was the last time you were going to a house showing and an illegal immigrant outbid you?
Or bid at all? They're not owning a lot of homes. Okay. I think it's really important as we talk about Vance's performance in this debate and the way that he sane washed MAGA stuff through, no offense to you, Ravi, his Yale mouth.
Bad day for Yale law school. Or good day, I guess, depending on, I guess the education showed.
Yeah, but as we do that, what we have to remember is that when we talk about a JD Vance, a Josh Hawley, even a Chris Kobach, it's really important for us to remember that if we characterize them as crazy, if we characterize them as so out of touch that they don't have the ability to take these crazy ideas, and not crazy to them, but these devious and super pro-corporate, white supremacist, often male dominant ideas, and wash them through reasonable sounding rhetoric. If we underplay that, then we don't prepare people to have their guard up to that. If we treat Vance and Hawley and even a Chris Kobach, who people have only heard about but haven't seen use this superpower that they have to make horrible things sound reasonable. If we make them sound like they're Marjorie Taylor Greene or Donald Trump, then people aren't prepared for when this happens. And that's what we saw here is JD Vance is where he is because he was able to sit in rooms with people like Peter Thiel, major donors and people who consider themselves rightly or wrongly intellectuals and seem like a heavyweight to them. JD Vance is a super smart guy. So we've got to stop saying they're crazy and we've got to start saying they're devious. And they're malicious, they're manipulative, because that's what they actually are.
Yeah, and obviously we anticipated this. I think we talked about it last week. I've been talking about it for a while that I thought this was both a bad idea, this debate, and that I was very concerned about it. I didn't want to give the final word to honestly an untested person in Walz and a capable evil person in Vance after we had won the last debate. Now, I'll give you my initial impression of this, and then we'll go through the data that we do have, which is very imperfect but helpful. And we can kind of come out the other side and talk about, well, what actually happened in this debate. I said yesterday, mid-debate, that I felt like this was halfway through the debate, that this was a conventional win for Vance in the sort of conventional parlance of debates. Like when George W. Bush would win a debate. There's these low expectations of him. He surpasses them. I think he was better than what Bush would ever have been in a lot of those debates in terms of just his polish. I think he was worse than Bush in terms of his likability. In a weird way, Walz, I think, benefited a little bit from the Bush phenomenon of I like this guy, even though I don't always know what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
And then Vance was a little bit of the Kerry Gore model of elite guy, makes some good points, and on the issues is making some sense. I came out of it thinking to myself that was like a traditional win or even a traditional landslide, right? But not in the range of the last two debates where it was like earth-shatteringly bad performance by one person and a really good performance by the other, which in this case was Harrison in the last one. That was my sense. And I can go through my reasons. I felt like Vance was on message. He kept talking about his family. He kept talking about immigration. He kept talking about inflation, the economy, and all that. Walz, first 10, 15 minutes, the most important amount of the debate, was noticeably nervous. He was allowing Vance to get away with a lot of arguments that weren't just arguments about who Vance and Walz were, but about Harris and the Harris ticket, like hits that Trump himself was not able to make. And Walz wasn't tying together a cohesive narrative that would stick. That was my midway impression of the debate. And by and large, that was my impression. And it generally still is after reading this. I think it was a net loss. But the clip we showed about January 6th, so much about whether a debate is won or lost is about how people interpret it afterwards, especially since a lot of people didn't watch it. I do think that January 6th clip, if handled correctly, can dwarf everything else that I just said. And second thing is, the very little imperfect data we have suggests that people did like Vance, and we have to take that seriously, but they also really, really liked Walz more than I personally did. And I may be looking at it with my yellow sort of hat on and lens and not on average swing voter and what they're looking for in this debate.
I think I agree with that. And I think it comes down to two things. One, most people were not as familiar with Vance and Walz as they are with the other candidates. If they watched this debate, they watched it to learn more about them, right? And if all you've heard is this guy's an idiot, this guy's crazy, this guy never tells the truth, this whatever. Right. Well, when you see the actual human being dialed up to do the best they can do, you're gonna like them more than you thought you would. In both, right, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. But to me, the bigger thing here is that if you are the campaigns, if you think about the two hits, if there's like a hit that each side got in, it's Walz didn't do a great job handling the, were you being truthful when you said where you were during Tiananmen Square? The whole thing is unhelpful to be talking about it, to the way he handled it. It wasn't great. that hurts Walz.
Yeah, not the ticket. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah,
but
not
but
Harris.
the response to January 6th for Vance, anytime they're talking about that, that's bad for the Republican ticket and it's bad for Trump. So and hardly anybody is ever going to be voting unless they're looking for an excuse to vote a certain way based on the ticket. Now, if you pick somebody who's so untenable that it reflects terribly on your judgment, i.e. Sarah Palin, i.e. to some degree the way Vance has been launched, that can hurt you. But for the most part, nobody's like, I would, but I don't like their running mate. So that's why Walz answering that question poorly is, not the best, but I don't think it's going to sway anybody's vote. Whereas getting into January 6th and the fact that the vice presidential choice for Trump has to pretend that he doesn't know who won the election because that's what Trump requires, that's bad for the Trump ticket.
Yeah, and it happened at the end of the debate, and that's where I think like a lot of the work is to just get that out there. Like I did a video on it last night. It was the first video I put up, and you just try to do your part to make sure that this is a critical piece of information that just people should know, regardless of what your desire is for this election. Like knowing this guy really doesn't believe in the peaceful transfer of power is really important. Let's go through some of the data that we know so far. And these are not always the most scientific, but it's the only information we have. CNN Snap Poll favorability change. This is the one that's really making the rounds. Walz a +14 favorability to +37. Wow. Vance -22 to Vance -3. Really important. Let's pause there for a second. This is going to be, I think, an enduring consequence of this. Now, that's just the people who watch the debate. But the narrative on Vance is already changing on the right. He's a hero to the right now. What does this mean? Well, we've gotten Vance right and wrong at various points. If you remember, you and I were dancing on his grave in the Senate race.
Yeah.
So I want to just caution our audience for what the enduring consequence of this is going to be in the best case scenario, which is we win this election and Vance did a lot of work to solidify his standing as the person at the top of the ticket next time. Now, that could be good because he's still not that popular and a lot of his liabilities are still there. And we now know what the playbook is against him. But it is important to know that Vance did a lot of good work for Vance. And if you've watched enough bad movies, even if we vanquish Trump, Vance doing work for Vance, just like he did in that Senate race, could be something that comes back to haunt us. We have got to keep in mind that this is a guy who improved his standing by 19 points among the people who watched it, if we believe that poll, which makes sense to me based on what I saw from his performance. And that is an important fact, regardless of how it affects the election.
The only thing you really need to know is that if JD Vance for the Republican nominee right now, I think it would be worse for us than Donald Trump being the nominee at the top of the ticket. He's more capable as a BSer. And that's what they're doing. And he's just better at it. Now, would he have the same fervent, following? Probably not. So maybe it balances out. But he's a formidable adversary.
Yeah, and I think this, I think Trump is still the front runner, even if we win this election for the next one.
Or his kid.
Yeah, but I do think Vance did a lot to help himself, and he did a lot to help himself with independence too. This is a reality. Now, and we'll go through some of the other data here. The other thing to keep in mind here is that we have to be intellectually consistent. And when Vance was deeply unpopular, we were saying he was weighing down the ticket. So the flip side of that is we have to acknowledge the possibility that a more popular Vance could be weighing down the ticket less. Translation, it could have improved Trump's standing last night. That is a possibility that people need to keep in mind, because I know a lot of people, I listened to all the podcasts this morning, and a lot of people are understandably saying the thing I said about January 6th and all that, which I do believe it's a really important moment. I don't want to lie and say that there wasn't a lot of risk created last night by Vance's performance. But back on the good-ish news, CBS had an issue-specific poll, and they said that Walz won on abortion and healthcare. Vance won on immigration, and there was a tie on the conflict in the Middle East and the economy. I would say a tie on the economy, that's actually better than what Harris did. From what I understand, that was the one area of the Harris debate that she had not done particularly well on. So that's not bad. Politico poll had a straight tie in this, and there's interesting crosstabs. It looks like Walz's strongest ratings come from younger people, 25 to 34, and those with college degrees, and Black and Latino respondents. Vance did best with people over the age of 55. And yeah, it was a straight 47-47. And there was an NBC focus group where 5 of 6 undecided Pennsylvania voters said Walz won. The Washington Post had one that had more people going to Vance than Walz. So I think if you look at the Snap data, it could suggest more of a tie than what my eyes told me. Yeah.
Remember last week when we talked about polls and understanding how polls are weighted and it matters and not all polls, we explained this to the viewers last week and the listeners. It's important when you look at this. This is a good example of it. This poll said that it was split 47-47. And it also said that Walz won independents 58-42. So what you have to deduce from that is that this poll had more Republican respondents than Democratic respondents. And that's just important. It's a good example of what we're talking about, which is that means that you have a pollster who is assuming that there will be more Republicans turning out in the election than Democrats. Maybe they're right, but you got to take every poll with that sort of thing in mind.
Right. And let's go around Twitter to see what some of the different takes are here from people that we take seriously, some of whom we've talked to on this podcast before. David From, the sort of never Trumper, said Vance is going home tonight with Walz's wallet. Vance didn't even have to snatch it. This was before January 6th, by the way. Walz just handed it over along with a bunch of unearned compliments to Vance's fine character. So he's getting at this dynamic where they were complimenting each other. And I commented on this on Twitter. Like, Vance was doing something really smart, which he would be like, Jason, you're the least honest person I've ever met. But I actually agree with some of the stuff that you're saying, and I hope you die. He was doing that basically. And then it would be like, what you remember, because of the way he would talk about the 2 sandwich items, is that you'd remember, oh yeah, he's like kind of conciliatory. But if you really listen to what he was saying, he was just daggers on there. And I'll come back to that because I think stylistically there was something interesting that happened on that stage. Tim Miller said, got to admit JD's ability to code switch from a sociopathic ass who is ambivalent to human suffering on MAGA bro podcast to a guy who credibly seems like he doesn't want other people to die on the debate stage is a useful political skill that he's deployed with effect. So the sort of never Trump world seemed rather underwhelmed by this performance. And I take them seriously because I think a lot of our friends in the left-leaning podcast sphere think like Democratic operatives. Mm-hmm. So what they say privately and publicly are 2 different things, which is something we learned throughout the whole Biden saga until it was absolutely impossible to do anything but acknowledge what was going on. Now, Dan Pfeiffer had a newsletter, and this is like, Dan would hate this if he heard this because I set him up to be one of these people. But I always trust Dan's take on things, too. He tweeted a sort of tweet storm. I'll read you some of these. He said, the pundits universally declared JD Vance the winner of the debate. Sure, he was slicker and smoother than the initially nervous Tim Walz. They are wrong, and that assessment shows a real disconnect with the voters who will decide the election. Folks like me who would have loved to see Walz rhetorically eviscerate Vance and hold him to account for all his shameless lies and blatant hypocrisy. But that's what the voters wanted. They view debates as opportunities to learn, not gladiator combat. The biggest moment was when Vance refused to acknowledge that Trump lost the election. So that was Pfeiffer's take. So just providing the full spectrum so people kind of, or a spectrum so people kind of get a sense here.
I think his point about people tuning in to learn is a really important point. And that's why when CNN went to this, they somehow found like 8 undecided voters, which is super hard to find.
Right.
But
you never trust that too. It's like,
because it's like, here are 8 undecided voters who want to be on television to talk about it. Okay. They have no agenda. They would just like to go on television to talk about it. But only one of them said that, they had drawn a conclusion as to which way to vote from it, which would buttress Dan's point that people weren't watching to decide how they're going to vote. It was more information.
Yeah. And one sort of legacy of this is I think it's less likely that Donald Trump is going to debate. I don't think it was going to likely in the first place, but Don Jr. was asked, I think this was before the debate or in the spin room, whether Trump would debate. This is what he had to say.
But I want to talk about the debate. Do you want your dad to do another debate after seeing tonight?
You know what? I don't think he can have a chance at getting a fair debate. I don't think there's moderators out there that would do that. I think there are probably Fox moderators that are so worried about even, trying to appease the left that they'd actually maybe even.
Well, your dad said
way.
CNN gave him a fair debate.
Can I just say
even
something?
Fox News wouldn't?
Yeah, here's something it's a trolly thing that I like, which is, if you ever noticed that the Trump kids, when they talk about Donald Trump, they always say my father this, my father, because it sounds like more dignified or whatever. And then I do enjoy when reporters refuse to do the your father thing, because the your father thing, it sort of acts like I'm talking to you right now out of some sort of effort or accomplishment of your own, and not just the fact that you are the progeny of this person. And so I gotta hand it to her that she just kept being like, your dad. Like, clearly we're only having this conversation because he's your dad, and it's just a side thing. But I respect.
And actually, I had a super interesting conversation with the people who wrote the New York Times writers who wrote the Lucky Loser book, all about the Trump history. I think I'm going to air it tomorrow on Lost Debate, but I learned a lot reading that book. Like, there's this myth out there that Trump's dad like never said I love you, and like, if only, I think Tim Miller says this all the time, if only his dad said I loved you more, we wouldn't be in this mess. Turns out his father doted on him and gave him everything, including like $1 gazillion to start his businesses, and continually made excuses for him. And that I was not prepared for that version of the story.
That actually makes way more sense, doesn't it?
Yes. Very interesting early history of Donald Trump. His father, it was as a New Yorker, I didn't realize how important his dad was. Like, his dad built so many of these projects all around New York City where they're just vast swaths of apartments. And that whole history is like a very good history of New York. Well, with that, when we come back, we're going to talk about the hurricane and the misinformation spreading around that. We're going to talk once again about our boy Ted Cruz and whether he's in trouble. We'll check in on Florida, and then we'll just peruse the Trump rallies to see if he's saying anything of note. All this and more when we come back. If you're dealing with a lot of stress, those feelings don't just disappear at bedtime. Do you have trouble falling asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, or are you not feeling rested in the morning? These are all signs of your bedtime routine and that it could use an upgrade. Calm can help you learn to de-stress and fall asleep faster so you can get restful sleep every night. I need to tell you about Calm, and this Calm is really the solution to this problem. It's the #1 app for sleep and meditation, and it gives you the power to calm your mind and change your life. Calm knows that everyone faces unique challenges in their daily lives, and mental health isn't just a one-size-fits-all solution. That's why Calm offers a wide range of content to help you navigate life's ups and downs, with programs like meditations to help you work through anxiety and stress, sleep stories, sleep meditations, and calming music that will help you drift to a restful sleep quickly and naturally, grounding exercises if you're feeling overwhelmed, and expert-led talks designed to help you handle grief, improve self-esteem, care for relationships, and more. I use Calm a ton, and I love their sleep stories in particular. Those are my favorites. And it's really helpful to listen to, especially everything going on in our politics. And Calm puts the tools you need right in your pocket, and you can dedicate just a few minutes each day to live a happier, healthier life. Stress less, sleep more, and live better with Calm. For listeners of our show, Calm is offering an exclusive offer of 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/majority. Go to calm.com/majority for 40% off, unlimited access to Calm's entire library. That's calm.com/majority.
Are you interested in having hair that grows faster, stronger, and longer, having visibly thicker volume, experiencing noticeably less shedding? All of this is possible with Nutrafol. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand trusted by over 1 million people. See thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. Nutrafol supports healthy hair growth from within by targeting key root causes of thinning: stress, hormones, aging, nutrition, lifestyle, and metabolism through whole body health. While many supplements rely solely on ingredient studies, Nutrafol clinically tests final formulations to ensure their efficacy. In a clinical study, 72% of men saw more scalp coverage after taking Nutrafol men's hair growth supplement for 6 months, and 86% of women saw improved hair growth after taking Nutrafol Women's Hair Growth Supplement for 6 months. With a Nutrafol subscription, building a hair growth routine is simple. Purchase online, no prescription required. Automated deliveries and free shipping keep you on track. Plus, you can save up to 20%. You'll have access to free naturopathic doctor consults, and a Headspace membership is included. Get results you can run your fingers through. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code MAJORITY. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code MAJORITY. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code MAJORITY.
All right. Well, first of all, for anybody who is a listener who's in the path of this hurricane, we're thinking about you. We hope you made it out safe. We hope any damage to anything you own and count on is not permanent, and that if it is, that you get the assistance that you need. From what we could tell, this hurricane made landfall on Thursday, and it was a Category 4 hurricane, and it was the third to hit this Big Bend region in Florida in 13 months. And the surge broke records. There are at least 130 deaths as of yesterday. And on Monday afternoon, 2 million homes and businesses were still without power, and floods continued to devastate areas from Florida to Virginia. One of the hardest hit areas was Buncombe County in Asheville. It's an area I spent a lot of time in. Rainfall was measured at over 2 feet, causing some of the worst flooding in over a century. And, it looks like a lot of residents were just cut off. And thankfully, President Biden issued a major disaster declaration for Florida and North Carolina, which allows survivors to immediately access funds through FEMA. The Coast Guard and FEMA have been deployed across the region. 10 federal search and rescue teams were on the ground in North Carolina. Another 9 were on their way Monday, according to FEMA. And trucks and cargo planes have arrived with food and water. So, given this, Jason, I know this is an opportunity for us to step back and just take a break from the partisan politics. And I'm sure that's what's happened across the internet.
Yeah, unfortunately, no. No, not so much. Yeah, it's truly awful, and particularly, not particularly, but in addition to all the awfulness of a natural disaster, you have the awfulness of, as people have a partisan axe to grind, and they put out misinformation, it makes it more difficult for people to access help. It makes it more difficult for people to survive the disaster. And it's just gross.
Yeah, and there's a great piece we're going to link to. I think we can link to it in the show notes. Do we still do show notes? But you could find it on Tangle,
so, yeah.
readtangle.com. My friend Isaac Saul, who he basically has this newsletter where he kind of gives you a summary of what's going on, and then he says, here's the right-leaning take, and here's the left-leaning take, and then he says, here's my take. And he quotes from the Federalist, which we don't need to put in there, but basically just talking about how they're saying, oh, Biden is lounging around in Delaware on vacation, Harris is in California in a fundraiser, and the presidency has become, in their words, a Potemkin village, and they're not doing anything, essentially. And I've seen tons of videos shared on the internet to this effect. I don't know if you listeners have too, where there are videos of people saying, they're not coming for me, but they're tweeting about Ukraine and sending aid to Ukraine, but they're not giving aid to North Carolina, right? And Isaac has a very, I think, spirited reply to all of this, where he just goes through all of the assistance that I just talked about, and says, and he talks about how now, Trump, as you can imagine, is spreading misinformation. He said, for instance, that Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, couldn't connect with Biden, yet Kemp said at a news conference the day before that he had spoken to Biden and he got everything he asked for. Even Ron DeSantis said he got everything he asked for. Cooper, of course, said the same thing. And, Chef Jose Andres, who's actually been quite critical of the Biden administration in a lot of different areas, said that aid was flowing quicker than any mission he's ever seen. And so, listeners, I just point you in the direction of that piece, because if you got people in your life, it's got pretty comprehensive information and an easy way to talk about this.
Yeah, and I would also point out what we were saying a moment ago, which is one of the things in that piece, is that if people are, in a position where they're in the path of all this, they're their property's been damaged, they're without their house, or they're close to people who need to reach out for aid, and they're getting misinformation that says that there's no help, well, then they don't know that the disaster declaration has been put out there so that you can apply for FEMA aid immediately. They're not going to know that if they believe that misinformation.
Yeah, and I'm going to make a controversial point, but that's been on my mind. And it goes together with the immigration, the crime stuff, and this, which is what the right wing does now is if there's any hardship out there, right, including unavoidable hardship, right? Like there's always going to be some crime. There's always going to be some assimilation tension, no matter how you manage immigration. And a good example is Springfield, where it seems by and large it's helping the town. But of course, there are going to be housing shortages. There are going to be cultural differences. If you let in any number of people, some of those people will inevitably commit crimes, even if it's by fewer numbers than native-born populations. Those things are going to happen. And also, when a hurricane hits, even if the response is perfect, people are going to be stranded. People are going to die. People's homes are going to be destroyed. What they are trying to communicate to the American public is if anything bad happens to you or to anybody anywhere in the country, you need to point the finger at Democrats. No matter what, even if the trend is good, even if the response is better than any response that's happened before, if crime is going down, if immigration is going down, if they've got a border bill that is everything that Trump wants, if a town is actually being transformed for the better, if there's a single uncomfortable person out there, or even worse in the case of this hurricane, if people are going to die because of, by the way, more extreme weather events due to some things that perhaps are relevant politically, well, then you're going to be able to point the finger to somebody else. And that's where our energy is going to be, not trying to make the response as good as it possibly can be.
Honestly, yeah, you're right. And it's not just anywhere in America. I mean, they're like, well, Putin invaded Ukraine because of Biden. They're like, what's going on in Gaza is exclusively Biden's fault. And it's like, I mean, look, there are things that you can reasonably be critical of the Biden administration for on all of those things, but you can't say that it's their fault. I mean, it literally happened outside the country. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Well, let's do a fun, quick detour, and we have a wonderful guest, so I don't want to shortchange her, but it's really important to me that we keep this front and center. So the last few polls when it comes to Ted Cruz in Texas, PPP, which is a Democratic leading poll, had Cruz +1, and his Allred was +5 on the net favorables, whereas Cruz was -8. Emerson +4 for Cruz, Texas Hispanic Foundation +3 for Cruz, Morning Consult Allred +1. Cook Political Report this morning moved Texas Senate from likely Republican to lean Republican. And Cruz seems panicked here. Let's go to a clip of him on Fox News.
My debate's October 15th, and I'm running against a hard left Democrat, Colin Allred, just like Kamala Harris. Both of them are hiding in Biden's basement. Both of them are trying to run away from their radical left-wing record, and both of them are relying on hundreds of millions of dollars. As you know, Sean, Chuck Schumer is flooding millions of dollars into the state of Texas. George Soros is flooding millions of dollars. We're being massively outspent. And so I'm so grateful for everyone watching who goes to tedcruz.org. Tedcruz.org makes a contribution of $25, $50, $100. We are being massively outspent. I'll tell you, we've had now 2 polls in the last 2 weeks that show this as a 1-point race. And in fact, we've had 2 polls that show the Democrat winning because Chuck Schumer is spending so much money. It's why I need so many of your viewers to go to tedcruz.org right now and support us.
So he's panicked. There's a whole other clip where he just lost it on people at a press conference. I'll spare you that. But, there's 2 parts to this. One is, this is what you do to raise money. The other part is, there's really something to what he's saying. Like, this is a real trend.
So here's why I think it is possible Cruz could lose. But here's why it's so difficult to land this plane for Allred. Now, I've been in this situation before where you're running a better campaign than your opponent. Your favorables are better than your opponent. And yet you are having to defy the political weight of the fact that you're in a presidential year and your candidate is not going to win your state. And it's not really in doubt that the other candidate for president is going to win your state, which is why Cruz has the luxury of going through and just all he has to do, tie all red to Kamala Harris. He can hug Donald Trump as tightly as he wants because that's his political life preserver, right? Is that I'm going to run behind him, but I got to stay, as tightly wound to Trump as I can, and he'll drag me across the finish line. But what Cruz is dealing with, and the reason that it's actually possible that might not work, because what we're seeing across the country in these Senate races is most of the time that works. And we've talked about this before. And it's because when you're voting for governor, the partisan coattails don't work quite as well because people think you have to do something. When you're voting for Senate, they think that position has to do something. When you're voting for Senate, rightly or wrongly, people think, well, any idiot can push the button I want them to push. And so what I want is I just want to vote for the person that's my party. That is usually the case, but Cruz has almost run into like a little bit of a gubernatorial problem in that since the last time he ran for the Senate, he went to Cancun during a blackout. He's done a bunch of stuff that fall into the category of incompetence, of mismanagement of your job that usually would hobble a gubernatorial candidate and not a Senate candidate. So I do think, while he's definitely the underdog, I do think there's a chance Allred can win the race.
And Texas is expensive. So everybody out there, go out and donate money to Colin Allred's campaign because it takes a lot of money to contest Texas. And a lot can be done there. Florida also appears like it's shifting in the right direction. Nate Silver tweeted out that Florida polls have gradually tightened to the point where it's at least an interesting decision for Harris HQ on whether to invest there. He says the ROI is not great, but you can get a puncher's chance of winning a Senate race, and talks about how on July 16th, the split with Harris-Trump was 48-38, and then when he tweeted this, it was 49.9 to 46.6. So closing fast. Good trend. Back in my day, we used to, contest Florida pretty vigorously. Mm-hmm. And as, some historians have pointed out, people tweeted out the Jimmy Carter map. I don't know if you saw this on Twitter.
It's crazy.
I don't even want to do it's basically the entire south and east of the U.S. and the entire west, including California, was Republican territory. So things can change really fast. Ohio used to be a more winnable state for Democrats than Virginia, so you never know. Things can shift. Let's skip the Trump rally stuff because, we have a great guest and, people can just know that you've probably seen a lot of his clips. Trump has been saying crazy things on the stump. You can go to the Midas Twitter feed and the Kamala headquarters. They're pretty good at clipping these things, and it's important to share these with people in your life to remind them that Trump is more insane today than he's ever been.
All you need to know about all the clips of Trump and what he's been saying lately is that Trump has to compete against himself because people are bored with Trump. They're not tuning in anymore. He's lost the sense of like, I wonder what he's going to say next. And so he's got to keep upping the ante. And the only person, it's like Shohei Ohtani right now. Like Shohei Ohtani hit 50 home runs and 50 stolen bases. He's the only member of the 50-50 club, but then he got to 54-54. So like of all those clubs, he's the only member. So the only way to break a record is to break your own record. That's right. Trump, but with awfulness.
I have a question for you about that when we get to one for us. If we get to that today, I have a baseball question for you.
Okay, good. Well, you're just going to make my day. All right. So we'll go to for a minute to our guest. We're gonna speak to Melissa Johnson. She is an incredible person. And she is running to be the Jackson County prosecutor. I live here in Jackson County. That's where Kansas City is. And she is right now the director of public safety for the city of Kansas City, works for Mayor Lucas, who's been a guest on this show before. She's a graduate of Columbia University and the University of Missouri Law School. Like I said, she's the Democratic candidate for county prosecutor. I wanted her to come on for two reasons. One, I wanted folks in the audience to know about her. I think they're going to like her. I think she's somebody to watch. And also because she has been talking a lot about opportunity courts and the way that crime is affected by opportunity generally. And I think that dovetails very nicely with Kamala Harris's message and also with Kamala Harris's background. So with that, let's bring on Melissa.
Hello, everybody.
All right, welcome. Thanks for coming on. All right, so Melissa, talk to the viewers and the listeners here a little bit about how you see like violent crime and crime generally, not just in Kansas City, but in urban areas, and how you see it differently than just the whole defund the police thing versus the tough on crime thing. Like, talk a little bit about your philosophy, because I think it's unique and it's worth hearing from people.
Absolutely. Well, my philosophy is rooted in where I was raised, which is right here in the urban core of Kansas City around 35th and Prospect. While I love my community, it's one of the most dangerous places in Jackson County. And I still live in the same neighborhood that I grew up in. And so my perspective is, yes, we need accountability. We need prosecution. There has to be consequences for criminal and egregious conduct, but we cannot repair broken homes in a courthouse. We cannot shrink socioeconomic gaps in a courthouse. We cannot instill hope for the future in a courthouse. And those factors are what really reduce and prevent crime before it happens. So as the next Jackson County prosecutor, I am going to intervene in ongoing crime with the full force of the law, leveraging technology, cell phone analytics to strengthen our cases, strengthen our investigations so we can hold more people accountable. But I'm also going to work diligently to prevent crime before it starts as well. And one of the main ways that we can do that is through providing opportunities to nonviolent, low-level offenders that are deserving of a second chance. And that opportunity looks differently for everybody. We have a bad habit in this country and this community of telling high-risk and returning citizens, you are only capable of construction. Now, that is honest and lucrative work. But what if they want to start their own podcast like the two of you? What if they want to be an entrepreneur? They want to learn how to code, to be a graphic designer. We have to have that full slate of opportunities available to them because it increases the likelihood that they actually see an opportunity through. But a job in isolation is not sufficient. If I grew up in an ecosystem where everybody around me resolves their problems through violence, I'm going to do the same thing. So we're also going to offer conflict resolution training and financial literacy education as well. We're going to fight crime in the courthouse, but outside of the courthouse as well.
Go ahead, Ravi.
Oh, I was just going to say, just for those of us who are outside of Kansas City, I'm just curious, like, what are the trend lines in Kansas City? Like, is crime going up? Is it going down? Is there some idiosyncrasies here?
So unfortunately, crime is going up in our community. Last year, we were coming off of a record-setting year as it pertains to violent crime in Jackson County. We are seeing a slight decline in homicides, but our non-fatal shootings as of today are up about 27% compared to last year. But you know what is also happening in our community? Our affordable housing stock is depleting. Our employment rates are lower. And so all of this is interconnected. And that is how I view this issue and how I plan to attack it. And also another facet of that is our juvenile offenses have certainly skyrocketed, as well as property crimes in this community. And so this notion that we can just incarcerate our way out of this issue is disproven by the fact that we incarcerate more people in the state of Missouri than any other democratically led country in the world. And we're still coming off of a record-setting year. Property crime is still completely out of control. So we can't exclusively rely on incarceration and punitive punishments, which play a role, but they can't be the only strategy.
So before you go, one of the things I just wanted people to hear about is your concept for opportunity courts, because I think when people are listening to the show and they're thinking about, well, what is something different I can say to people that I'm trying to persuade? I think new ideas are really helpful in doing that. So I think the best thing is if you could give people a little context about like veterans courts and drug courts, which are largely pioneered, particularly drug courts, by Claire McCaskill when she was in the position that you're running for, and then how you want to extrapolate that out to this concept of opportunity courts.
Absolutely. A modern prosecutor has to do so much more than be a figurehead in the courtroom. Under the prosecutor's office, there is a $30 million annual fund that is to be invested in violence prevention and intervention initiatives. Some of the things that we fund with that money is our slate of diversion opportunities. We have veterans court, mental health court, and drug court, as Jason mentioned, but we don't have a specialty court tailored to the leading root cause of crime, and that is poverty. And so where there's opportunity, there is naturally less crime, which is why the strategy that I just described to you will be called the opportunity court, where nonviolent lower level offenders will get connected to this restorative opportunity to change their life. Now, if they squander it, then incarceration, typically the status quo way of going about things, we will rely back on that. But we have to try new things because what we've been doing hasn't been working. And I like to think, and this is a wishful thought, that maybe Kamala Harris has been listening to me because I've been talking about this opportunity court for about the past 11 months. But the notion remains true. If people have access to opportunity, the world is a much better place.
Well, Melissa, thanks so much for coming on. Tell people where they can find you.
Yes, please check out my website, melissajohnson.com. That is MELESA Johnson.com. All my handles on social media are MJ for prosecutor, like Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson. I'm leveraging these amazingly famous initials that my mother blessed me with. So you can check me out there, learn more about the campaign and how you can support. And I thank you both for having me on today.
You bet. Thanks for joining us.
I was grinning because I had a really bad joke about crime involving the Kansas City Chiefs, but I held back because I knew, actually, as funny as it was to me, she might have had to answer it and would have gotten her in trouble.
Yeah,
so I was just like,
thank you for
so
look, when our athletes,
so
for the most part, when our athletes
they do it out of
the law, yes, we keep
yeah.
we don't do it here. Like,
yeah.
So you know,
yeah.
I don't
Mostly,
know how
I'm not going to get into some of the ugly.
All right, look, let's move on here. All right, one for us, Ravi. Tell us what you've been up to.
Well, I didn't see any football games this week, but I did.
I bet you didn't.
Yeah. What I did see though was I went to the Liberty semifinals. First, I think it was the
cool
professional women's sporting event I ever went to. I couldn't remember whether I had seen another one. And I live across the street from Barclays, but I've probably mentioned on this podcast before, I have no respect for the Brooklyn Nets. And so I go and I root against them. But it was really cool to go to the Liberty, which, first of all, packed house, incredible. Your boy Jason Sudeikis was there. Spike Lee. It very much felt like a Knicks game, like the energy of a Knicks game. And, you know, they won. They're now up 2-0 in the semifinals. It looks like they're heading to the finals probably, you know, hopefully for the second year in a row. And it was just an insane energy. Like, what an amazing sporting event. And they have risen up the power rankings of New York sports teams. Now, I would say it's now, my rankings would be the Knicks are the biggest unifier. I would say then the Liberty. And then it's like, it's probably Rangers. Like, because then you've got all the splits, the Mets, Yankees,
Jets,
Giants, Bills, of course, the great unifier of the state.
Right.
But yeah, Liberty, I would say number 2 in the state right now, or in the city.
There was a great 60 Minutes piece the other day about the WNBA and its rise. And it had in it, I thought, some really interesting stuff about the compensation for WNBA players and the difference in whether or not they're going to get a rev share from owners. And it was interesting because the players were saying, they're like, look, we're not asking that we be paid the same as NBA players. That's not what we're asking. But NBA players get a revenue share with the owners, and we would like that because just like the NBA players, we are what people are coming to see. They're not coming to see the ownership. They're not coming to see that stuff. I went to a Kansas City Current game, which is the National Women's Soccer League, a few weeks ago. Shout out to the fact that in Kansas City, we have the first, and it's to Chris and Angie Long and to Brittany Mahomes, and that team have built the first purpose-built stadium for a women's professional sports team anywhere in the world. And it was an awesome experience. And people were super into it. So we just sound like a couple of mansplaining dudes being like, hey, women's sports, really good. But
no, they're really, and there are some cringe shirts that the Liberty sell, which is like, I support, or I can't even remember what the headline is, but they're just too try hard. It's like, it's sports, right? That's what we should probably be talking about. It's like, it's now just sports. Like, that's what I felt like when I was there. It was like, it didn't feel like this thing that lives outside of professional sports. It was sports. And honestly, I would rather go to a Liberty game right now than a Nets game any night of the week. Like, and so that's a good thing there. Okay. My question on baseball is the records. Why don't they disqualify the steroid people? Because wouldn't it be good for baseball if now Aaron Judge, Ohtani, all these people are actually chasing attainable records? Like, more people would tune in and all this. And it seems like they're willing to do certain things. Like Pete Rose didn't go into the Hall of Fame. I think a lot of these steroids people have been barred from the Hall of Fame. Why not cleanse the record books?
Well, I'll give you the reason that the Hall of Fame would say as to why they don't, or why baseball writ large would say they don't. And then I'll tell you why I don't think that they should. One, the big thing with baseball, unlike any other sport, is the idea that it is able to compare eras, which is wrong. Okay, because Babe Ruth only played against white players. I mean,
Right.
which
and they were all hammered all the time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But it's also just to say, like, a huge portion of the baseball playing population was not allowed to play against Babe Ruth.
Right.
So to say he was in the major leagues is like, okay, except, the 1942 Kansas City Monarchs are probably the greatest baseball team in the history of baseball. Right?
Yeah, if you did an experiment, I mean, I haven't looked recently, but if you took only the white players in the major leagues, that would be the minor leagues.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Yeah.
like if you accepted out any demographic,
Right.
you wouldn't have the most competitive league if you don't, and so, but that said, one thing they've tried to do is they've now tried to bring more Negro Leagues players into the Hall of Fame, which they've done. They've now actually incorporated Negro League statistics into Major League statistics. So that's all good. But if you say, okay, like officially, McGuire, Sosa, Bonds, their home run records don't count, you run into a couple of problems. One, we don't really know when they started using performance-enhancing drugs. Barry Bonds, if you were to take all of the years where we think Barry Bonds was using performance-enhancing drugs away from him, he'd still be one of the greatest baseball players, certainly one of the greatest hitters of all time. So that's not really clean to be able to do it. The other thing, and this is my reason, is nobody really wants to talk about the fact that, like, the pitchers were also using performance-enhancing drugs during that era. The baseball was looking the other way. Baseball was like, oh, we had the strike in the early 90s and people were going away from baseball. And now McGuire and Sosa are chasing the Maris record and everybody's watching. So we're just going to not say anything about the fact that most of these guys are on PEDs, or a lot of these guys are on PEDs. So baseball doesn't really have the moral authority to do that when they were like, yeah, it's good. I mean, there was a point during the home run race in 90, I guess it was 98, where McGuire's giving an interview and there's a bottle of Andro over his left shoulder in his locker, because it never would have occurred to McGuire to hide it, because nobody in baseball was discouraging it at all. And so that's why I don't think you can. But what's amazing is Shohei Ohtani seems to be doing things at a pace where you compare him to any era. The guy is an alien. It's amazing.
Yeah, and this, for listeners who don't follow, is a pitcher and hitting phenomenon from Japan who plays for the Dodgers, who are now, I think, in the playoffs, right? They're always in the playoffs. And your guys are in the playoffs. They won.
We won game 1 yesterday of the and as we record this, or as we stream this on Wednesday, they are an hour away from playing game 2. And if they win that, they move on to play the Yankees.
So it's a best of 3. So then they'll be coming here. Oh, that'll be cool.
That's right. Yeah, so,
yeah.
Okay. My one for us is baseball related. You'll be shocked, I'm sure. It's kind of funny. So as you know, and as probably a lot of the listeners know, I play in men's league baseball. So it's not softball, it's baseball. I mostly play in, my team plays in 2 leagues. We play in an over 30 division, and then we play an over 40 division. And, there's a handful of guys on each team who used to do it at least at some level professionally. A lot of guys who played Division 1, and then there's a guy like me who's like a good high school player who is just trying to stay in the lineup. I'm going to play in this tournament, same I did last year in Arizona at the end of October, and my season in the over 30 and the over 40 league is just ending, and I was like, well, I want to keep getting reps, so they had this little truncated fall ball season that you could sign up and just be a one-off and join a team for. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. What I didn't know is that the teams playing in this fall ball league, which is just 6 games over the course of a few weeks, they're from the 18 and over league in Kansas City. So I show up last week to play, and I'm on this team where I was the 9th or 10th guy. Like they needed one more to round out the team, and I'm 20 years older than everyone on the team. And there were a few things that were funny about it. One, I got recognized by a couple of guys right away, and the stuff they said is great. Like one of them was like, oh, my brother at one point lost his dog and tweeted about it. You retweeted it and we found the dog. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then the other guy goes, my dad is a huge fan of yours. I was like, okay, not him. His dad is a huge fan, right? And then they said stuff like, at one point, first of all, they all sound like true, like my 11-year-old son. It's all Gen Alpha, Gen Z slang. So I'm like trying to hang in. I made a reference at some point to a movie and like clearly nobody got it. And they're like, they actually referred to the century I was born in, not jokingly, as the 1900s. Not being mean or cruel. They just like, that's how they refer to it.
That's the first time I've heard that. That really hits you. Now, are you hanging with them? Or are you?
Yeah, actually, I'm proud. I'm proud of myself. At least so far, I went 2 for 4 and actually stole a couple bases. Really they were even like, "Hey, you should play with us next summer." And I was like, "I'll stick to fall ball with you." But yeah, we'll see how I do the rest of the way. It's just funny. Like at one point, I realized that most of the guys in this team were born after or right before 9/11. So it's an interesting experience, to kind of be the chaperone.
1900s. Oh my God.
Yeah. So I'm just hanging in and it's pretty fun. So I'm doing my best. All right. Well, thank you to Melissa Johnson for coming on. Thank you to everybody for listening. You can find Ravi at Ravi M. Gupta on social everything. You can find me at Jason Kander in all the same places. Please leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. And remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.